The Prime Minister confirms a further easing of England's coronavirus restrictions from next week. Outdoor hospitality, gyms, hairdressers and shops can reopen from April the 12th, but social distancing rules are staying in place. Free, twice-weekly rapid testing will also be made available to everyone in England.
We set out our roadmap and we're sticking it. And I want to stress that we see nothing in the present data that makes us think that we will have to deviate from that roadmap.
But the Prime Minister warned we cannot be complacent about the pandemic and that trials will begin on some form of COVID certification. There is also no decision yet on when non-essential international travel, including holidays, can resume. In Scotland, some easing began today, with hairdressers, garden centres and car showrooms reopening. Hello, good evening. Welcome to the BBC News at 6. In the last hour, the Prime Minister has confirmed that the next step of England's roadmap out of lockdown will go ahead as planned. Non-essential shops, hairdressers and gyms can reopen, and pubs and restaurants can serve customers outdoors from next Monday. The Prime Minister said he was hopeful that foreign travel could resume next month as planned in the original roadmap, but he said no decision has yet been taken, and the UK doesn't want to see the virus re-imported from abroad. Ministers have also confirmed that they will make rapid coronavirus tests available to everyone in England. From Friday, people will be able to take 2 lateral flow tests a week. They'll receive a result within just half an hour. But Boris Johnson warned that social distancing measures are to remain in place. Our political correspondent Ian Watson has all the details.
It's been a long road out of lockdown, but now, if you live in England, you may well be working out what to do this time next week, getting in shape in the gym, snipping off the lockdown locks, taking a trip to the shops, or relaxing outdoors with a drink. Yes, what was once normal will feel like a bit of a treat. The next stage of unlocking will take place from April the 12th. And at his press conference today, the Prime Minister said cheers to that.
On Monday the 12th, I will be going to the pub myself and cautiously but irreversibly raising a pint of beer to my lips. But, and you know I'm going to say this, we can't be complacent. We can see the waves of sickness afflicting other countries, and we've seen how this story goes. We still don't know how strong the vaccine shield will be when cases begin to rise.
And to help keep the virus under control, from Friday, everyone in England will be offered regular, rapid lateral flow tests. And the Prime Minister is looking at how other areas of the economy can reopen safely. Pre- and post-event testing will be trialled at some major sporting events this spring, including the World Snooker Championships in Sheffield and the FA Cup final at Wembley. More controversially, there'll be a trial of what the government calls COVID status certification, or what critics call vaccine passports. These would mean that you'd have to prove you've been vaccinated, or recently had a negative test, or actually had coronavirus in the last 6 months and so have some immunity. Just how widely would these certificates be used, and how soon? Would you like to take this opportunity to reassure the sceptics that while it could be useful for big events, people will not need to take a certificate to the local pub to gain entry?
There is absolutely no question of people being asked to produce certification or COVID status report when they go to the shops or to the pub, garden, or to the hairdressers or whatever on Monday. So and indeed we're not planning that for step 3 either. May the 17th, as you know, we're hoping to go for the opening up of indoor hospitality.
So no imminent use of COVID certificates. More than 40 of Boris Johnson's MPs oppose them, and support from the official opposition isn't guaranteed.
I have reservations. The Labour Party have got reservations around the introduction of vaccine passports. We have an amazing take-up of the vaccine. It's being rolled out incredibly successfully by the NHS. It's not totally clear to me that we need a sledgehammer to crack a nut here.
But to get closer to normality, it could be that we'll all have to do things that would have seemed highly unusual just a year ago. Ian Watson, BBC News.
And let's get the thoughts of our medical editor, Fergus Walsh. And Fergus, I did hear the word caution many times in that news briefing there.
Absolutely, Jane, but the key indicators are all going the right way. I mean, it's a month now since schools reopened in England, and yet cases haven't risen. In fact, in the past 7 days, they've fallen by 44%. Deaths continue to fall, down 44% in the past 7 days, and hospital admissions down by nearly a quarter in a week. Now, partially that's lockdown, but it's increasingly also the success of immunisation. One dose of either the Pfizer or the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine among the over 80s reduces their risk of being hospitalised by 80%. So highly effective, not 100% effective, so reinforces the need for a second shot. Now, some minutes from government scientists, the SAGE scientists today, say the next phase of opening up on April the 12th is highly unlikely to lead to a resurgence of pressure on the NHS, but they do predict a third wave sometime later this year. Not a hard prediction, but very difficult, they say, to know when or how big that will be. And finally, there is a social distancing review which is looking at whether rules on social distancing could be relaxed in certain settings and whether the guidance on home working might change.
Interesting. All right, thank you very much, Fergus Walsh. Well, let's take a look at the latest government figures around coronavirus. There were 2,762 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means, on average, the number of new cases reported per day in the last week is 3,494. Across the UK, an average of 3,536 people were in hospital with the virus over the 7 days to Sunday. 26 deaths were reported. That's someone who dies within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. On average, in the last week, 35 deaths were announced every day. The total number of deaths so far across the UK is 126,862. The UK is continuing its programme of mass vaccination. In the latest 24-hour period, more than 48,000 people have had their first dose of one of the 3 approved vaccines, taking the overall number of people who've had their first dose to just over 31.5 million. The number of people who've had their second dose in the latest 24-hour period stands at 47,708, and that takes the overall number of people who've had their second inoculation to more than 5.4 million people. Well, as we've been reflecting, there is still no decision about whether non-essential international travel, including holidays, can resume. But there was confirmation that a traffic light system of countries will be introduced once travel abroad is allowed. The government says when it happens, the NHS will be involved to create a travel certificate. Our transport correspondent Caroline Davis reports.
Preparing for international travel takes time. The industry is already gearing up, hoping that they'll have a summer season. But today the Prime Minister wasn't making any promises.
Obviously, we're hopeful that we can get going, but from May the 17th, we're hopeful. But I do not wish to give hostages to fortune or to underestimate the difficulties that we're seeing in some of the destination countries that people might want to go to. We don't want to see the virus being re-imported into this country from abroad.
When international travel does restart, it will use a traffic light system. So far, we only know some countries on the red list. Anyone arriving to England from designated green countries won't need to quarantine, although they will still need to take a test before they travel back, and more when they arrive in the UK. Those travelling from amber countries need to take all of these tests and will be required to quarantine at home on arrival for 10 days. Although if they pay for an extra test on the 5th day and it's negative, they can leave quarantine early. Only UK residents will be allowed in from red countries, and they'll need to pay for quarantine at a hotel as well as taking these tests. More details are expected later this week. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland haven't committed to a date for when international travel might restart. Whether a country is added to the green list will depend on the vaccines and the prevalence of concerning variants. This was the last time Laria and her children saw her parents in San Marino in October 2019. They get to meet her one-year-old daughter.
They've missed a whole chunk of her life that they can't really take back, especially with what's happening in Italy and in Europe at the moment. It puts that end goal further and further back, and it makes for a stressful situation.
This is a new testing centre at Luton Airport. The company behind it is expanding its capacity at other airports too. There are worries that the costs of multiple tests could put off travellers, and questions about how much notice the industry and passengers will get about which countries will be green.
Clearly, passengers and consumers and airlines need clarity at some point, and we still don't know at what point we will know where we can travel, which countries will be in the amber, red and green categories. If that comes in the next week or two, that is perfectly understandable. If it's several days before the 17th of May, it makes it a lot harder. So some sort of clarity as to when we will know where the countries are would be very welcome.
There are still plenty more details needed before travel can take off. Caroline Davis, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Guy Hedgecoe is in Valencia, and Spain is one of those countries that is desperate for clarity, Guy. Tourism so important to the economy.
Yes, that's right. You can see behind me there are still a few people out on the beach here. Earlier there were a lot more people out on this beach and other beaches in and around Valencia enjoying the sun today. Today's been a holiday. But having said that, there are still a lot of measures in place, a lot of restrictions in place here in the region of Valencia and in other parts of Spain and nationwide as the country tries to keep infection rates under control. For example, there is a curfew in place nationwide, and also you're not allowed to travel from one region to another. That has been a big problem for the tourism industry, but perhaps the biggest problem for the industry has been a lack of foreign visitors to the country over the last year or so. In 2020, there were 65 million fewer foreign arrivals to the country than in a normal year. That had a huge impact on the economy, and the government of Pedro Sanchez and the tourism industry in general are desperate to try and remedy that going into the summer season this year. They're not pretending this is going to be a normal summer season by any means, but they are hoping to attract British and German and French tourists this year, especially the British, who form nearly a quarter of all foreign arrivals in a normal year.
Guy Hedgecoe, thank you. The family of a 2-week-old baby who died after a car hit his pram yesterday afternoon have paid tribute to him. In a statement, Kieran Morris's family said, "We didn't get to keep you for long, but we're happy we had the chance to meet you, look after you, and call you our son." Police say it's understood a car was involved in a crash in Brown Hills near Walsall before mounting the pavement. A man has been arrested. The Conservative MP Dame Cheryl Gillan has died after a long illness. The Prime Minister described Dame Cheryl as a great servant and said she was much loved on all sides of the House of Commons, and said that she would be sorely missed. A former Welsh Secretary, Dame Cheryl had been MP for Chesham and Amersham since 1992. In Scotland, hairdressers, garden centres and car showrooms have reopened today in the latest easing of coronavirus restrictions there. Salons and barbers have been welcoming customers with pre-booked appointments, although most non-essential shops will have to stay closed for at least another 3 weeks. Here's our Scotland correspondent, James Shaw.
A big day in Scotland for barbers and hairstylists, and everyone who's been desperate to tame their lockdown locks. Hair salons say they're taking high levels of bookings, but they're also having to deal with continuing health and safety restrictions, which limit the amount of business they can do.
We're so happy to be back in the salon, just getting back into doing what we love the most, and seeing all our colleagues and all our regular clients coming back is just wonderful.
And their customers could not be happier.
It's fantastic, and I've been coming to this salon for about 12 years, and I know it's a great place to come to.
It might seem like a small thing to some, but getting a haircut can definitely contribute to a feeling that the worst of the second wave of the coronavirus crisis may be over.
Well, I have to say, it's an enormous relief for me to be able to get a haircut after 3 months at least of waiting for one, and for thousands of other people in Scotland as well. But these are not the only freedoms that we're going to start enjoying from today.
It's been sunny across much of Scotland, which has encouraged many people to head for their local garden centre. These changes are part of the Scottish Government's roadmap out of lockdown, which continues at the same time as preparations for elections in May. Over the course of the crisis, the Scottish Government has sometimes seemed more cautious than ministers in London, and that tone was evident in the latest guidance from the Health Secretary.
What we've done and what opens up today, I'm sure is very welcome by very many people indeed, but our progress needs to be tempered with a degree of caution, and that's of course exactly the approach that we're taking here.
This is nowhere near the end of the pandemic, but today's limited new freedoms may at least make people feel that the winter crisis is over and deliver a small measure of hope. James Shaw, BBC News, Glasgow.
And that's all for now. Time to join the BBC's news teams now, wherever you are. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Welcome to BBC London, I'm Alpa Patel. It's exactly 2 weeks since 19-year-old Richard Okorogeye was last seen by his family in the Ladbroke Grove area of London. Specialist police divers have been searching parts of Epping Forest, along with officers and police dogs. Another search of woodland in northeast London is also continuing. Lee Milner has this report.
19-year-old Richard Okorogeye has been missing for 2 weeks. He has sickle cell disease and has been shielding due to the pandemic since last March. He left home without his medication. Described by his mother as focused, intelligent and loved, she says his disappearance is completely out of character.
While police divers and specialist officers have been searching Epping Forest for 5 days now. In a statement, Detective Superintendent Danny Gosling, head of the Met Central West Public Protection Unit, said, "I have a teenage son myself, and this strikes a chord. We all hope that we can reunite Richard with his family soon." Now, he also added that officers will be making door-to-door inquiries in the Smarts Lane area of Loughton.
That residential street is where CCTV footage captured the last sighting of Richard at around midnight on the 23rd of March. He's seen getting out of a taxi wearing all black, walking towards Epping Forest. The day before, he had left his family home in the Ladbroke Grove area of Kensington at 8:30 in the evening. 15 minutes later, he was seen boarding a number 23 bus.
It's really important that the public get on board if they've got dash cam or they've got any form of video footage that they could provide to the police. But young people use Facebook, Instagram, all the social media. Posting photographs of this young man, Richard, would be of a great help, I think, to police officers and anyone that may have seen him or spoken to him. You know, their help would be vital.
Police say Richard's mobile phone hasn't been used since he disappeared. As the search continues, police are appealing for anyone who may have seen him to come forward. Lee Milner, BBC London.
A vigil has been held to mark the 1-year anniversary of the death of railway worker Belly Majinga. Members of her family, including her husband, attended the gathering outside Victoria Station where she worked. Belly died with COVID-19 after an incident where she was allegedly coughed and spat on by a male passenger. Police decided there wasn't enough evidence to charge